You know, Job realized that he's maybe been speaking a little bit out of turn, and of course God ends up telling him that for sure. But in some of the things that are said relative to these animals, it is really interesting, especially in the sense that what is said about these animals we know to be so today, but back at the time in which this was occurring, if indeed it is the case, and I believe it is, that this is recorded during the patriarchal age, then God is revealing God's hand in the created world, especially in the animal kingdom, and is showing how that his wisdom is there, even though mankind might look upon things and question how that could be. And of course, we live in a time, yesterday I was watching a documentary for a few minutes on hummingbirds, okay? Mom and Daddy always had hummingbird feeders, and it's just amazing as to how those things can just hover. I mean, they take flying to a level that nothing else can, obviously. Well, in this, and of course, it was one of them David Attenborough things, you know, for the scenic beauty of it and all. You can't do any better. But he was explaining how that the hummingbird evolved over time, and really, the hummingbird evolved because the plants needed something to do the fertilizing business for them, and so the plants actually caused the development of the long beak and then even the longer tongue to be able to get down into the deep recesses of the flowers to pollinate them and all that. And he puts 60 million years on this and 120 million years on this, and I mean it's like they had a camera there when all this was happening. And so mankind has heard that and has believed, because I mean, how could you spend so much money putting such a wonderful documentary together as that and it be based upon lies and wishes? But yet that's exactly what it is. Could it very well be that there was no evolutionary process by which, and even went so far as to say that the hummingbird ultimately, in trying the evolutionary theory of trying to eliminate excess body weight, finally ended up with not even legs but just feet on which to perch, and so he can't even walk around anymore. Now think about that. Enough time elapses to your legs just keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter to make you lighter and lighter and lighter, and then all of a sudden, whoops, no legs. Now I just got feet, and all I can do is perch, can't walk. In other words, with enough time, anything can happen, which is a lie. It's not true. If that was the case, then there should be examples of all this progression. And of course there's not. It's circular theory that discredits the God who created the universe, and it elevates man to this genius who's able to look back upon it all and explain it all in direct detail. It was amazing. At different times he'd say supposedly or possibly, or of course it was all in the realm of speculations, all it is. And so, but the things that are said here relative to the animals that God has created, of course, stand as a testimonial to the design that God placed in the universe from the get-go. And while there have been changes that have occurred in various species over time, I mean, I don't know what the average height of a male in the world is today. I don't know if it's taller than it was 2,000 years ago or shorter. I would guess that because of nutrition and maybe some other factors, that maybe man is a little bit taller over the years, you know. But given this type of thinking, then if man needs to be taller, then just give enough time and he'll be 12 foot tall. He'll just keep on growing. Or if he don't really need his legs for whatever he's using, then ultimately he won't have no legs, he'll just have feet, which is ridiculous.
Our thumbs will become straws because we like milkshakes.
That's it. We won't need a straw anymore. We can actually form within our own mouths a tongue that turns into a straw by the process of evolution. It's just totally ridiculous. And so he uses some examples here. And people have the tendency to look on an ostrich as being sort of dumb. But yet, when you look at what an ostrich can actually do, outrun a horse, that's pretty good for a bird. Can't fly. But what it can do, and there's a whole lot of things that God has created that we sit back and we look at and say, wow. You know the song that the kids sometimes sing, hip, 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 hippopotamus. Have you ever looked at the hippopotamus? Well, here we're going to see what some commentators have described as hippopotamus, which ain't a hippopotamus at all, but we're going to see that here in our discussion. And so you've got a horse that's pictured, a horse that's going into battle. I mean, can you imagine a horse that's going into the midst of a firing line, and yet the horse does that? It's the flaring nostrils of the horse as he's galloping right into the midst of an army. You know, that's pretty amazing for a horse. And yet that happens, and of course the hawk and the eagle and all these things as well. I ran across a comment that was made. I wanted to read it to you because this was in one of these so-called explanation things. The Lord asked Job in verse 26 here if it was by his wisdom that the hawk was able to fly. And then there's a bird expert by the name of Peter Farb who says this. Here's quotation. Hawks exhibit just about every technique to be seen in the world of flight. Or is it the case that technique and that ability was inborn, or was that developed over time? You know, that's the whole idea behind evolution, is that it had to be developed over time. And so when you see the migration routes that are taken, verse 26b there is talking about that. And in recent years, so those that have claimed to be scientists have learned a whole lot about bird migration. They know that they plot their migration routes by using the sun, the stars, and so on. But then these scientists will automatically admit then that they don't know why that is. And here's a quotation from one of them. A far more ancient guidance system and instinct acquired in the egg. So here's the instinct that's acquired before the bird is hatched that causes it to understand all those things. You see, whenever you see in a statement made like that, then you look at instinct and you see they don't have a clue. That's the best they can do. Could it be that God created it that way? Of course it could be. As a matter of fact, that's exactly it. It had within its design the ability to do that. And mankind and all of his brilliance is not able to do anything, but it's instinctive, which means we don't really know why, but it happens. And the best thing for anybody to say when they don't really know is, I don't really know, instead of pontificating as if they know. And that goes in any area that we're in.
Freddie?
Yes, sir.
I've seen programs that were evolutionary in nature, you know, where they're talking about various phenomena. And they will inadvertently use the word design even when they're talking about evolution.
Yeah.
And they don't realize, obviously, that that's a contradiction in the very point they're trying to make.
Exactly.
If it's design, it can't be evolutionary.
Exactly.
And yet they'll use that term when talking about evolution.
Yeah. Yeah, it just seems like the mechanics of everything is the way it's supposed to be, but we can't say that that was actually the result of a designer. That's just something that happenstance brought about, supposedly. And then, of course, he talks about the eagle able to fly so high and be able, with his great eyesight, to spot something that he can eat a long way down. And it's even been estimated that they could see for 3 miles, you know. I mean, see what I'm going to go down there and eat from 3 miles away, which is pretty amazing. Yes, sir.
I was watching the History Channel one day, they said that the eagle could fly at 75 miles an hour.
75 miles an hour. Now, there's some type of hawk. Yeah. There's some type of hawk, I can't remember the name of it, that's over 200 miles an hour when it dives. Or maybe a falcon. something. But I mean, it's unbelievable as to how that. And of course, a couple 100,000 years ago, it couldn't go but 150. But then it kept working, kept losing weight, shedding unnecessary feathers. Its legs got shorter, its wingspan got a little wider, and it became more aerodynamically correct so that it'd be able to. That's, of course, ludicrous. But yet, that's the so-called explanation. If you've got enough time, the impossible can happen. Well, you've got to change your definition of impossible then. And of course, we're living in a time in which definitions are changing for sure. You can't call anything what it actually was 5 minutes ago. You've got to change the definition of it to fit the present narrative of things. No. If a definition was accurate 5 years ago, it's accurate today. Yes, sir.
You talk about how they look down, so-called intellectuals, you know, and those who embrace evolution. I heard a liberal politician recently make a statement in regard to conservative voters, in effect, that they don't even believe in evolution. In other words, he characterized the stupidity of those who vote conservatively as being those who don't even believe in evolution.
Yeah.
How stupid they are, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that was one of the things that they threw as a negative towards Herschel Walker was that he started talking about the creation of the world in Genesis chapter 1, and they laughed him off the stage, you know. And of course, so sad, but yet it's the world in which we live, and we'll just have to deal with it. All right, that's it. And it's obvious by what they're willing to promote and do. They don't have any moral standard whatsoever. Their standards are ever changing to meet the present criteria by which they determine their power. All right, in chapter 40, as Job ends the first discourse, as God ends, what does he say then to Job, beginning at verse 1 and 2? All right. Is the one who is contending with me, is he capable of correcting something I've said? Or is he in a position where the Almighty needs to bow at his great wisdom? Now, if you could picture yourself as being on the receiving end of all this evidentiary information that God has provided to Job relative to what he's created in the animal kingdom, of course, the next conclusion would be, and above and beyond all that, he created you, Job, and he created mankind in his own image. I mean, these are powerful examples of God's creative ability and the design that he placed within the universe. But the mountain of the whole creative sphere was mankind himself. And yet here you are in a position to question what's come your way. Now, of course, if you're in the position that Job's in, then you're grasping at straws already to try to figure out what in the world's going on. And so a good rebuke is in order for sure. And of course, God turns it around on Job by saying, in essence, that Job has been guilty of rebuking God. Well, let's hear why that is. Well, Job, why are you in a position where you can rebuke God? You're going to have to answer me why you're taking issue with me. Now, at this point in time, if he has any strength at all, then his knees are knocking together because he's scared, and rightfully so, because he's questioned the high and holy God, who has the ability to smash him out of existence immediately. And so how does Job respond? Chapter 6, or question 6. What is Job's response to these questions, and then what is God's challenge back to him? What does Job admit? I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. What? He said, I've done talked too much. No more am I going to say. I'm not going to say anything else. I don't know what happened to me. Well, he does know what's happened to him. He's he's confused. He's in physical, emotional turmoil, for sure. And so he says, I've let my mouth run off when I shouldn't have.
Well, one of the wisest things that you can do, if you don't understand something, you shut your mouth, and you'll wind up learning a little bit about it.
Exactly.
And that's what Job is doing.
Exactly. Job realizes he's in a position here before God. He wanted an audience with God. He's got an audience with God. And so now he realizes that he doesn't really have a reasonable answer to speak any further. Well, then what does God challenge him? He says, you've spoke before. Has the cat got your tongue now? You know? But he's not going to proceed any further in his response. All right, number 7. As God continues his second discourse, or really continuation of the first one, what challenge does he repeat to Job? He says, I'm doing what? I'm asking you questions, and when I ask questions, then I expect you to answer me. You know? Now, is this for God's benefit? No, it's for Job's benefit. It's like when in Genesis chapter 3, when God said to Adam and Eve, where you at, Adam? But did he not know where Adam was? Well, sure he knew where Adam was. But Adam needed to realize where he was. And so it wasn't a matter of God needing the information that came from Adam. It was Adam needed to realize the pickle he is in because of what he had done. And Eve too, of course. And here Job needs to know that as well. And so when he says, I'm going to ask you questions and I want you to answer me. And so then developing that on further in question number 4, what 4 questions does he then ask of Job? He asks concerning the decisions that God makes or the judgments that God makes. And he says, are you in a position where you would question the judgments that I make? No? Can you do that? Are you such a person that you have the capability to set aside the decisions that I make? And that's what he means by judgments or decisions that would come out. And then, and of course, this is a reference back to chapter 32, verse 2 as well. He says, would you condemn me so that you could end up being somehow justified in your own eyes? I mean, you can throw all this at me and question why you're in this position, but in your doing that, is that going to put you in a level in which you're not condemned for what you're doing? Well, of course not. And then he asked him, does he have an arm like God? Now, wait a minute. What does he mean by that? Do you have an arm like God? The all-powerful arm of God. How big around is it? Well, he's talking about his ability, his power. Does he have the power of God? Have you got even a fraction of the power that God possesses? Well, of course not. And then the last thing he asks is, can you create thunder? Can the heavens shake at your will? That's just not going to happen. The thunderous voice of God should automatically get Job's attention, and obviously Job's not in a position where he can successfully reply to what God has said, because it again is elevating and showing the position that God is in and the lowly position that Job's in. What has Job got to be happy about? Even though he's probably been at different times not so happy about it. He's still alive. You know. But the only thing I guess he sees that could be worse in a qualitative way would be to die. But then would really that be worse? You know? Because of all the suffering that he's involved in. All right, so number 9, what then does God challenge Job to do in order to prove he could save himself? And of course, this again is figurative language that's used to show in a poetical way the incapability that Job has to elevate himself to any such thing as near the level of God. He simply cannot do it. Can he adorn himself in majesty? Of course not. Can he appear and possess the qualities that God can? Obviously not. While he is created in God's image, all the glory and all the beauty and all the celestial majesty of God cannot be even close to produced in him. And he also says something about where the beginning point of a proper responsibility or a proper relationship with God begins. It always begins with humility. Humility. Now, honestly, as you think back everything that we read here about Job and what his friends have said and heard the replies of Job, does Job look like to you already sort of a humble man? Well, he does, doesn't he? But you can be humbler, more humble than you are. And obviously, some of the things that he says rashly is an indication, at least in the mind of God, that he's not as humble as he needs to be. And just because you don't have all the answers does not mean that that gives you the right to cease being humble. Wow. Well, you talk about knocking the perch out from under people, but that'll do it right there, won't it? When you realize you don't know everything, that you don't have all the answers to all the questions that are asked, then that can be very notch knocking down in reality, because it's simply the truth. That's the thing, you know. It's not, you're not inventing something that isn't so. You're simply recognizing reality that we don't know everything, and the things that do happen, we can't always put a 3-point conclusion to it as to why. Can't do it. All right. Then number 10. What is the first of 2 great creatures that is described to illustrate the power of God? What's the first one that's mentioned here? Behemoth. Behemoth. Now, in the material here that is provided, that I've made a copy of for you, what does it say the behemoth is? I mean, that's another way to spell it, maybe. Behemoth, hippopotamus. You say hippopotamus, I say behemoth. But then when you start looking at the way this animal is described, while there are some similarities to what a hippopotamus is, then there's some that just don't fit at all. 40.
They fit the dinosaur better.
Exactly. They fit the dinosaur better than they fit a brontosaurus, for sure. Have you ever seen, and of course it's not a very pretty sight, but have you ever seen the tail of a hippopotamus? You know, when he's fighting with an alligator over something, you know, or a crocodile. Little bitty swishy thing, yeah. Like a pigtail. It really is. That's why Granny Clampett thought that there was a giant hog living next door, and instead of it being a hippopotamus, for some reason there's over at Banker Drysdale's house. You know, said, man, what a hog. Can you imagine the ham hocks on that thing? It was a hippopotamus. And so if the tail is like a cedar, and the indication is that if you get in its way, it might take you down just with its tail, then that can't be a hippopotamus, can it? No, not unless you've got a deformed hippopotamus. And it can't be an elephant either, because an elephant don't have a tail like that. Now, what we have described here is a grass-eating, close to the water, living, dwelling animal. And from the monstrous size of it, then about the only thing that fits the criteria is a dinosaur. Now, of course, why would some look upon that explanation as being impossible? Yeah, you can't. You can't say it's a dinosaur. The dinosaurs were long gone by the time Job or any explanation could be used from actual something that somebody saw and was aware of. And this is an area I'm afraid that we have not been as involved in maybe as we should have been down through the years as it relates to Christian evidences. Did you know that there are pictures on the inside of cave walls of dinosaurs? How's that possible? Well, somebody evidently saw a dinosaur and then drew a picture of it. If somebody told you, said, let me tell you something, there is this animal, and I want you to draw a picture of it. Well, you don't have any idea what to draw. I mean, you could be specific or general in it, but the only way you can get a picture of what a dinosaur looked like, and you don't have a phone on your, a camera on your phone, is you got to see it. And so you see these on cave walls in South America and Africa and other places around the world. You see these dinosaur pictures on the wall, which indicates somebody saw that animal and thus drew it. Somebody says, well, it may have been passed down from generation. Well, okay. Somebody's got, well, I've got this little picture and I'm going to transpose this little picture to a big picture on the wall. Well, who took that little picture? Well, Grandpa saw one. Well, the very idea that human beings and dinosaurs were not here on the earth at the same time, I'll give you 23 hours that the dinosaurs were here before man was. But on the same day that dinosaurs were created, man was. Same day. And I know that that's looked upon as foolishness, and I even heard when I was a kid, people who thought they were actually trying to help the situation said, well, God just put those fossils in the ground to challenge our faith. Give me a break. To challenge our faith? Now, obviously, they ain't got a clue about what faith is to begin with, but what kind of God is it that would set about to deceive and then see if the deception would cause a lack of, it don't make any sense at all. It's crazy. And there's absolutely no reason to go in that direction. Like I said before, the circular reasoning, here you've got the so-called geologic column, okay? And you got all these animals that supposedly lived here, and all these animals that lived here, and all these animals that lived here, so many billions and millions of years ago. And so you find one of these animals and you say, well, how old is that animal? Well, obviously this animal was 300 million years old because it's found in this layer. Well, how do you know that that layer is 300 million years ago? Well, because that animal was found in it. It's circular reasoning. Your proof is your point. It's not accurate. And whenever you find an example where a human being and a dinosaur were existing at the same time, then it takes that whole column and destroys it. The idea that's presented in the front of many so-called science books is if you dig far enough down into the earth, then you're going to find one-celled animals down at the very bottom, and you're going to find human beings up at the top. And yet that doesn't exist anywhere in all the world because they overlook one significant thing, that's flood. So sad. But friends, we see in the end result of people believing the lie of evolution. Yes, Wilma? Well, a crocodile is the Leviathan, I think, that we'll look at here in a minute. But the behemoth, more accurately, I think, pictures probably the brontosaurus, the one that sold Exxon or SO gasoline for so many years, you know. Together. and some with a trilobite encased in a sandal print. That's impossible according to evolution. But is it impossible according to the biblical record? Of course not. It's perfectly in accord with it. So we just...
Already, I think I've seen where there's a fossilized tree trunk that runs through several geological
Time?
tables.
Yeah.
In other words, all through.
Ain't that amazing?
That would be evidence that those layers were laid by the flood, not by evolution.
Exactly.
Same way with that dinosaur national monument out there in Colorado. It's like they took a slab of earth and rock and exposed this huge piece of rock. And there's all kinds of dinosaur bones in this thing from all kinds of different ones.
Yeah.
Which would suggest where that thing is laying, that the flood created a torrent down this valley, and all of these dinosaurs wound up drowning down there.
Yeah.
And then they come in there, whatever, about 4,000 or 5,000 years later, and shave that off, and look, here's where these dinosaurs all piled up, died down there.
Isn't that amazing? You know,
That stones have changed positions too over the last 7,500 years since we've been taking pictures of it. Guess what? That stone is still in the exact position that it was earlier.
yeah.
You know, one thing about fossilization, it don't take years long for stuff to fossilize and most people think of.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we made a garden in the same place every year. This family turned up year after year after year, working. And one time we was taking a potato, found a perfect fossilized potato. It was potato, obviously, but it was a rock, it was fossilized.
Yeah.
And that thing is, sometime in the last few years, it's fossilized.
Yeah. And if we'd have put carbon dating on that tater, it'd probably been 75 billion years old, or 75 million years old. Then you'd really have to put it in the microwave extra time to get it ready to eat.
That's the same way mountains were formed, they claim. They claim 400 million years ago, Africa and North America ran together, except before we got them out.
Yeah, exactly. And like Jim used the example this morning, you know, a little bit different, but here within the confines of a burial spot and finding grain and peas, then you take one of those peas that's 4,000 years old or 3,500 years old and you throw it in the ground and it grows. And guess what it becomes after 3,500 years? A turnip. No, it don't. It's a pea. It's a pea. After all that time, that's the way the gospel is, and that's the way God's word is. It'll always produce the exact same thing when good and honest hearts accept the evidence that are presented. So you got the behemoth, who some say is a hippopotamus, but we reject that primarily because of the tail. And while obviously, you know, hippopotamuses are amazing creatures, and more people are killed by hippopotamuses, I think, than lions and tigers and bears all put together, but that, I don't think that's it. Now, that's a pretty amazing thing, but as far as the description that God gives here to Job, the thing that meets the criteria of the tail like a cedar would seem to me to be a brontosaurus or another type of dinosaur. Then number 11, what statement concerning this creature emphasizes God's power and strength?
Only God can control or conquer.
All right, so this is an animal that is beyond the ability of man, even a whole group of men, to be able to civilize, you know, to domesticate. And of course, you know, there's something to be said. If you've got just a plain old plant-eating dinosaur, then just you got to watch where he's walking for sure. But you don't have to worry about him eating you, maybe. But here he's pictured as being first in the ways of God. In other words, the first there means he's predominant as far as here is the genuine example of the majesty and the power of God in this creature. Job, who are you compared to that? How do you explain that, Job? Then number 12. What is the second creature described to illustrate God's strength? Leviathan. Okay. And again, here, the suggestion by some, and it's even included in the material here, that that's possibly a crocodile. And of course, when I was a kid, I remember just about every time somebody went to Florida, and people didn't go to Florida as much as they do now, back then. But people would bring home these little old alligators, you know. And that looks cute, you know, but them little old alligators are about your finger. But when them things can get up 30 foot long and weigh over a ton, you know, you're talking about a major catastrophe if you happen to be swimming one of them things. You're not even a good meal for one of them things. You're a snack. Now, is it possible that that's what's involved here? Well, it's a possibility for sure. The power of this beast, and of course, Nile crocodiles, you know, those are some of the most ferocious there are, and how they go about their power and their ability to cause trouble for anybody that's near, or any animals that happen to try to water there or cross the water to get to another location. That's an amazing thing for sure. Number 13, what key point does God make about this Leviathan? In a comparative way, when you think about this crocodile here, who is the person who's willing to go out there and wrestle with that crocodile? Well, what about the God who created that crocodile? Should you be wanting to get in a wrestling match with God who created that crocodile? That wouldn't make very much sense, would it? So if you're not able to stand against one of these creatures that God has created, and of course he's not showing an ant here, you know, or a monkey or anything. He's showing the largest and most ferocious of his creatures, or the largest, and then the most ferocious of the creatures he's created. Then who's able to stand against God? If you can't stand against one of these things, then the God who had the power to speak this whole thing into existence, then you certainly can't stand against him. And then chapter 42. Having heard God, what does Job now admit? All right. God can do anything and everything, and there is nothing outside of his ability to bring about. There's nothing that is withheld from him. Now, sometimes you'll hear people trying to come up with logical contradictions which are incapable of God doing, such as, can God create a three-sided circle? Well, that's crazy. But anything reasonable and logical, of course, that's involved, of course, ultimately, we may have that definition changed too. Who knows? It may be the case that a triangle will no longer be a three-sided geometric figure. It may be something else by the time people get done changing definitions. And what else does Job admit about himself? He didn't really know what he did not have as full of an understanding as he should have of himself, and himself in light of who God is. He lacked that information, and because of that, he really was not in a position to pontificate about the situation he was in the ears of a holy, holy, holy God. The things are just too amazingly, wonderfully large and incapable of grasping for him to be in a position to question God, for sure. And of course, that doesn't just apply That's not something that just Job need to understand. That's what we all need to understand. That doesn't mean that his will is not capable for us to understand and do and enjoy the benefits and the blessings of it. But trying to put yourself in the mind of God without adequate information to do so is going to put you in the pickle like Job finds himself in trying to explain all these things that have happened to him. All right, number 15. Now now that Job has had his audience with God, how does he react?
I repent in dust and ashes.
I repent in dust and ashes. So we would call that, of course, a penitent attitude, contrition, a broken heart, a recognition of his failings, recognition of his not being God. All those things he finally is brought to realize. And of course, again, the terrible sin that he was supposedly guilty of that brought about the accusations from his friends never materialized. But his thinking was challenged. And of course, obviously, after the whole thing that we'll see here, after this whole situation, Job is far better man than he was before, even though he was excelled all others before all this happened. The way that he dealt with the things that he dealt with, of course, ends up making him a whole lot wiser man, for sure. All right, the next little section is referred to as the epilogue, that which comes last, which, of course, is going to be a conclusion of the book. And, of course, I don't hardly want to get started in that, seeing as how we're fixing to hear the first bell anyhow. So we'll just we'll get an extra few minutes here, and we will possibly be done on Wednesday evening. Any questions? Any comments?
It seems like we say, Job was a good man. Job was an upright man. And Job had sinned so that this would come upon him. But also in the end there we see, regardless of how good you are, you're still not God. You're not worthy of, him saying to us, oh, you're so righteous,
Yeah.
No, we're not that kind of, human beings are not that way.
No, not even on their best days, or their best days put together. And, of course, that fully expressed in the gospel for sure. Thank you so much.